Finally, about the world economy this year, what's your take on commodity prices and the war scenario effects in economy? I think we head to a normal year in some way, or we head to another bad environment year for a country like ours?
Well, I think the issues globally really are geopolitical. If there were not the war in Ukraine, and if there were not the U.S. tensions with China, the world economy would be in a pretty good recovery environment from the COVID period. The problems are everything is being dislocated because of the war and the U.S.-China tensions. I personally hold the U.S. heavily responsible for both of those crises because I think the war in Ukraine could be ended quickly if the United States would say, okay, we're not going to expand NATO. We're not going to keep pushing up to Russia's border with our military, because I think that's a lot of why this war occurred. And with respect to China, the U.S. is clearly the provocateur. Today's news, for example, is the U.S. is going to cut off all supplies to Huawei. Why? They're trying to destroy a leading Chinese company, basically because they're using geopolitics to try to hurt the Chinese economy, because American strategists are afraid of China's continuing economic success. It's a terrible way to run international policy. You should run your international policy to help your own economy, not to damage someone else's economy. And so the United States is creating a lot of mess. And one of the things that I think is important is that the South American presidents, and many are like-minded, should actually get together and speak with a single voice and say to the world, look, we want quiet, we want peace in Ukraine. I was very glad that President Fernandez and President Lula told Chancellor Scholz, we're not sending weapons. What a ridiculous idea for South American countries to get into the Ukraine war. Horrible idea. What the leaders in South America said was, you make peace, go to the negotiating table and end this thing. And that is where real macroeconomics is going to be determined. Is this going to be another year of war, or is it going to be a year in which peace is achieved? That's going to be the main determinant of whether we have a reasonable global economy or a continuing crisis.
What about inflation? Do you think it'll be a year with high inflation levels like 2022? Does it only have to do with war?
I think it will. If there's war, it will be a year of low or negative growth. In terms of inflation, the central banks of Europe and the US, the Fed and the ECB, will be the main determinants of the inflation rates, because basically geopolitics will determine the situation in the real economy, and to some extent the central banks will determine the inflation situation. And since the Fed and the ECB are tightening right now, I think dollar inflation will tend to come down, but add to the slowdown of the overall world economy. And whether the world economy has a economic growth or not will really depend on the geopolitical situation. Of course, I should make the obvious point that if there's a profound geopolitical crisis, if the war enlarges, or a complete breakdown in international energy markets, then you could have another massive shock of oil prices going to $100 plus and really having that effect. But I'm putting that aside. The problem right now is it's very hard to invest. It's very hard to have any perspective because the supply chains are being disrupted. Normal economic relations are being disrupted. And that is absolutely causing a global economic crisis. And the only way to end that is ending the war and ending these geopolitical tensions.